The other day I watched one of my favorite films, The Fugitive. I'm sure you've seen it. Harrison Ford stars as Richard Kimball, a doctor wrongfully convicted of murdering his wife. He escapes on his way to the penitentiary and he sets out to prove his innocence and find the real murderer. Tommy Lee Jones co-stars as Sam Gerard, the deputy U.S. Marshal who spends most of the movie chasing Kimball, a role for which Jones won a richly deserved Academy Award. The Fugitive is one of the best popcorn movies ever made. It's not a terribly deep movie, doesn't have a lot to say in terms of social commentary, is anything but subtle, and yet it works thanks to strong performances from an excellent cast, some truly outstanding action set pieces that still hold up today, and a breakneck pace maintained almost from beginning to end by director Andrew Davis, who never made a better film before or since. And The Fugitive has one of my favorite endings of any film. The chase is over. The real bad guys have been identified and caught. After spending most of the film as the pursued and the pursuer, Kimball and Gerard have a brief, quiet scene together in the back of a police car. Gerard gets off one final quip, followed up with a moment of genuine humanity shared between the two of them. And then we cut to a crane shot of the car driving away, and that's it. It's only natural to be curious about what happens after that. With the real culprits exposed and arrested, Kimball's exoneration appears to be a foregone conclusion, but the film ends with him technically still a convicted murderer. And the producers of The Fugitive leave us to wonder about that. And I think that's a good choice, because if the life of Richard Kimball had continued to unfold on screen in the same way as the life of the real man who inspired The Fugitive, the movie would have had a much more depressing ending. Though it's never been officially acknowledged, it's widely accepted that The Fugitive is based, at least in part, on the true story of Dr. Sam Shepard, a neurosurgeon from Ohio who was convicted of murdering his wife in 1954. Roy Huggins, the creator of the original television series The Fugitive, which aired in the 1960s, denied deriving any inspiration from Shepard's story. And it's true that the man on the run was a well-established trope, but there are enough similarities between the fictional story of Richard Kimball and the true story of Sam Shepard that I think we can safely conclude that the latter at least had some influence on the former. So, Sam Shepard was born in Cleveland, Ohio in 1923. After moving to Los Angeles to complete his medical studies, Shepard returned home to join his father's medical practice. Shepard and his wife, Marilyn, bought a house on the shore of Lake Erie, and they started a family. In 1954, when Marilyn was killed, their son Chip was 7 years old. Sam and Marilyn had some neighbors over to their house on the evening of July 3rd, 1954. They watched a movie together, Strange Holiday, which stars Claude Rains as a man who returns from vacation to find that the United States has become a fascist dictatorship. Sam fell asleep during the movie, and when it was over, Marilyn walked the neighbors out and went up to bed alone. Sometime later, in the early hours of July 4th, Marilyn was beaten to death in her bed. Sam was awoken by the sounds of Marilyn and her attacker and ran upstairs to the bedroom. The intruder knocked Sam unconscious. Sam came to, determined that Marilyn was dead, went downstairs, found the intruder still in the house, chased him outside, fought with him again, was knocked unconscious again, and came to this time to find himself in the lake with the intruder nowhere to be seen. Or at least, that's how Sam told it to the authorities. Sam Shepard told police that Marilyn was killed not by a one-armed man, as in The Fugitive, but by a bushy-haired man. This man was never positively identified, and Sam Shepard found himself the prime suspect in his wife's murder. The case attracted media attention from the very beginning and was headline news in Cleveland and across the United States for months. Shepard was mocked for wearing a neck brace, which he claimed was due to an injury he sustained while fighting with the bushy-haired man, and was presented by the newspapers as an unfaithful husband, which turned out to be true. Sam Shepard was charged with the first-degree murder of Marilyn Shepard on July 31st. The case against him was entirely circumstantial, but compelling nonetheless. Sam's long-term extramarital affair with a nurse who worked with him provided a plausible-sounding motive. A relative of Marilyn's testified about a time she'd seen Sam fly into a rage over some minor thing. The prosecution argued that Sam and Marilyn had been fighting about his affair when Sam lost his temper and killed her. There were other details that cast doubts on Sam's bushy-haired intruder story. The house showed no signs of forcible entry, the family dog hadn't barked, and despite a struggle between Marilyn and her killer that was supposedly loud enough to wake up Sam, who was asleep downstairs, their son Chip, whose bedroom was right next to his parents' room, had somehow slept through the entire thing. The trial lasted 9 weeks. When it was over, the jury deliberated for 4 days. They found Dr. Sam Sheppard guilty of second-degree murder, deciding that he had intentionally killed Marilyn Sheppard, but had done so without premeditation. Sheppard was sentenced to life in prison. This is a point of divergence between the true story of Sam Sheppard and the fictional story of Richard Kimball. In both the original television series and the film version of The Fugitive, Kimball is found guilty of first-degree murder and sentenced to death. Following his conviction, Sheppard spent the next 10 years in prison. That's another significant divergence between fact and fiction. The man whose story provided the basis for The Fugitive never actually was a fugitive. In 1961, Sheppard got a new lawyer, F. Lee Bailey, who would soon become one of the most famous defense attorneys in American history. You might know him as the lawyer who defended Albert DeSalvo, and Patty Hearst, and O.J. Simpson. Well, I mean, not all at the same time. Christ, what a trial that would have been. Oddly enough, a year before he became Sam Sheppard's lawyer, F. Lee Bailey also defended a man named George Edgerly, an auto mechanic from Lowell, Massachusetts, who was accused of murdering his wife. Edgerly's story is also sometimes cited as an inspiration for The Fugitive, which means that F. Lee Bailey defended not one, but 2 real-life Richard Kimballs. In 1966, Bailey convinced the U.S. Supreme Court to overturn Sheppard's conviction. The court agreed with Bailey that the original trial had been compromised by the carnival atmosphere created by the media, and that the judge had been biased against Sheppard. 6 months later, Sam Sheppard again stood trial for the murder of Marilyn Sheppard. This time, the jury deliberated for only 12 hours before returning with a verdict of not guilty. And it's at this point, if you believe Sam Sheppard was innocent, and you want to leave the audience with a happy ending, that you should crane up and fade to black. Don't tell them any more of this story. Because despite being found not guilty at his second trial, despite winning his freedom, Sam Sheppard's story did not ultimately have a happy ending. When Sam Sheppard was acquitted in November of 1966, the television series The Fugitive was about 2 months into its 4th and final season. In August of the following year, ABC aired the series finale of The Fugitive. It was watched by an estimated 78 million people, making it the most watched episode of a TV series in the history of American television, a record it held for 13 years. In the episode, Richard Kimball finally catches up with the one-armed man who killed his wife. The show ends with Kimball exiting a courthouse a free man. He tells the reporters gathered there that he intends to see his family and go back to work. Sam Sheppard tried to do that. He stayed in Ohio. He remarried. He resumed his medical practice, opening an office in a suburb of Columbus. In 1968, he was granted surgical privileges at a hospital in Youngstown. But he had also begun abusing alcohol. His marriage ended after 3 years. He was forced to resign from the hospital in Youngstown mere months after obtaining surgical privileges when mistakes he made during operations caused the deaths of 2 patients. In 1969, Sheppard met a new woman, Colleen Strickland. Colleen's father, George Strickland, was a professional wrestler. In August of that year, after receiving some training from Strickland, Sam Sheppard became a professional wrestler too. His celebrity made him a decent draw, but he wasn't a major star as a wrestler and was never much more than a novelty. He did invent a submission hold, the mandible claw, that was picked up and made famous by Mick Foley, aka Mankind, in the 1990s, but Shepherd's lasting contributions to wrestling end there. And as it turned out, pro wrestling was Sam Shepherd's last job. He died in April of 1970, just over 6 months after debuting in the ring as Killer Sam Shepherd. He was 46 years old. The cause of his death was Wernicke encephalopathy, a brain disorder brought on by his alcoholism. The true killer of Marilyn Shepherd, whoever they are, has never been conclusively identified. So yeah, the movie version of The Fugitive ends at just the right spot. The hero is victorious, the innocent man is vindicated, and he rides off to face a hopeful future. That's a luxury of storytelling that sadly doesn't carry over into the real world. In the fictional story of The Fugitive, we know that Richard Kimball did not kill his wife. We know the one-armed man is real. We get to see an injustice conclusively reversed. We get the comfort of knowing the guilty will be punished and the innocent will be set free. In the real world, we often don't get that comfort or that certainty. In the true story of Sam and Marilyn Shepherd, the facts were not always so clear, and the ending was not nearly as reassuring.